Hi, I'm Addison K. Witt, Poet Laureate of the Defense of Democracy and host of this podcast. The attack on America's public school system isn't slowing down, but neither are we. Here you'll meet authors, educators, students, and defenders from across the country who aren't just sounding the alarm, they're answering it. You'll be informed, you'll be moved, and if we've done our job right, you'll be ready to stand with us. This is the Defense of Democracy podcast. Let's get into it.
Hello, I'm Addison Witt, Poet Laureate of the Defense of Democracy, and this is my next solo podcast discussion. After a recent conversation about whether America should be called a republic or a democracy, I found myself wanting to sit with that a little longer, because language often reveals much more than people intend. And as I thought about that conversation, other conversations began rising too. Texas, leadership, voting, who steps forward, who organizes, and what kind of country we may be becoming, while many people are arguing over words. So today I want to talk about that plainly, thoughtfully, and without rushing past what I believe deserves closer attention. So I want to be real here. A few days ago, I was in bed and thoughts racing through my head, and in came this one. You know, when you're half tired, falling asleep, and that thought comes that you have to write it down. Yes, well, mine came in, and it was about Texas voting and, well, the many people I've had a chance to talk to who are running for office across the country. I've been thinking about who is stepping forward, who is running, who is speaking, who is quietly building momentum, and what kind of future begins to emerge when the people stepping into public life do not all come from the traditional political mold. Because one thing that has stood out to me recently is how many women entering public life or already moving strongly within it. They come with backgrounds deeply connected to real systems of human consequence, businesswomen, community organizers, mothers, advocates, women who have built things, managed people, solved problems where outcomes were immediate and visible. Women who understand what happens when systems fail because they have had to hold systems together themselves. And I also find myself wondering, what kind of society might emerge when leadership increasingly includes people formed by that kind of lived responsibility? Because for a very long time, much of leadership, certainly in America, political structures, not all of it, but a lot of it, has been shaped by aggressive male energy, force, position, dominance, territory, and often performance mistaken for strength. How many times have we watched men speak with enormous clarity, enormous certainty, and enormous force only to fold quickly when a stronger male hierarchy speaks above them? Start a constitutional conflict? Someone nods. Hide information? Someone adjusts the language. Escalate conflict? Someone signs the paper and the men say, I do. Then we know children suffer, civilians suffer, and still the machinery moves on. And too often, what we witness inside political culture is immediate compliance dressed up as discipline. When we look at the Republican Party, for instance, it is often women like Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski who at least appear for a moment to hesitate, to question, to resist before the room settles. And often many of the men step into line much faster. That tells us something about the state of our modern politics and its reflection on the state of our conflict in the world. Now, let's move to Texas, because Texas tells us something too. James Tellerico has been building something steadily for years, about 6 years, in fact, quietly in some ways, but clearly building a formidable reputation. His message has been straightforward, grounded in moral contrast, grounded in love for self and others, grounded in reducing what is loathsome without losing clarity about policy. He has found a way to present common sense beliefs in language that feels elevated without sounding unreachable. And perhaps part of that comes from his teaching background. I've spoken to a lot of teachers on this podcast, and there's a pattern I've noticed. Teachers are organized differently than lawyers with billable hours. A teacher must reach 30 minds before lunch. That creates a different civic muscle. A teacher learns quickly that authority alone does not create understanding. Tone matters. Repetition matters. Framing matters. Emotional regulation matters. And you can feel this grassroots attention gathering around Tellerico because many people, especially people exhausted by brutality and barbarism, can hear calm when calm is offered. Then there is Jasmine Crockett, who has entered public consciousness with tremendous force, clarity, and sharpness of voice. And I will say this personally. During an important matter involving my late sister, I reached out to her office, and her office responded immediately. And that mattered because responsiveness still tells you something about care. What I find interesting now is timing, because timing in politics always tells a story. Who enters when? Who steps forward when pressure arises? Who senses a moment? James Tellerico had already built visible momentum before Jasmine Crockett entered that same Senate conversation. Now, that does not diminish either one. It simply tells us that timing reveals how people read opportunity, urgency, and possibility. By the way, I invited both of them to sit down with me and talk. Their offices were gracious. Unfortunately, they declined for now. But we still have a lot of time before the midterms. Living in Dallas during the voting period was revealing because we watched confusion unfold in real time. Many voters seemed confused by the mechanics of voting itself. Dallas voters who had grown accustomed to county-wide vote centers suddenly faced assigned precinct requirements. And for many ordinary people, including my own mother, that confusion became the barrier itself. Voters arrived at familiar locations and were told, no. Now that matters because if a voter shows up prepared to participate and cannot vote because the system changed beneath them, then information has failed somewhere. And I found myself asking, why was this not louder? Why was this not more widely understood? Why were more people not prepared? Because if barriers are expected, preparation must be stronger than complaint. In November, there will be procedural obstacles, some expected, some unexpected, which means voters must prepare now. Know where you vote. Know whether your ID reflects your current address. Know whether your precinct has changed. Do not wait until the final week to discover what the rules now are, because civic frustration without organization changes very little, and participation itself is part of democratic culture. Not merely voting, but understanding how voting works, teaching how voting works, anticipating obstacles before they arrive. That too is leadership. And maybe this is why I keep thinking about women entering leadership now, because there's often a different instinct present. Not always, but often. More questioning, more balancing, more layered listening. Where male political culture often rewards immediate alignment with hierarchy, women frequently arrive already practiced in managing contradiction, managing households, managing classrooms, managing emotional weather. managing systems where human beings do not all move at the same speed. And perhaps that matters because our culture itself feels emotionally unstable. We are confronting extremism, wealth inequality widening deliberately, people pushed apart racially, economically, geographically, almost as if society is being instructed go back to your corners. And once separation begins, control becomes easier. Now, this connects directly to why my work with the Defense of Democracy Film Festival feels meaningful right now. We're preparing for June 12th through 14th. Now, this is a virtual festival, and this festival will feature full-length documentaries, short documentaries, conversations, stories that ask what democracy requires of ordinary people. Because documentaries often do something politics does not do well. They slow us down long enough to actually look. And while updating the festival page, an old acquaintance from Los Angeles wrote to challenge one word I used: democracy. He wrote, "We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic." And of course, that sentence appears constantly now, as though one word must cancel the other. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has repeated similar language publicly. But language has always been more intelligent than ideological shorthand. The larger question is not structure alone. The larger question is, what kind of civic life survives inside the structure? All right? Stay with me here. Because, yes, we are a republic, a constitutional republic. We elect representatives. We do not vote on every law ourselves. That is republic structure. But democracy describes how that republic breathes, how it moves, voting, participation, speech, balance, rights, access, public accountability. The republic is structure. Democracy is movement inside the structure. The republic is the building. Democracy is the air moving through the rooms. And if the building remains while the air disappears, people suffocate. That is why people say defense of democracy. Not because people are ignorant, but because they're speaking about protecting fair participation inside the republic. A republic can also drift toward authoritarianism. A republic can be ruled by oligarchs. A republic can tolerate fascism. A republic can collapse within itself. A republic describes constitutional form. It does not guarantee moral outcome. That is why democratic norms matter so deeply. American presidents repeatedly say they are defending democracy because democracy names what ordinary people experience when liberty is alive. No president stands before the nation and says, "We're going abroad to defend procedural republicanism." They say democracy because democracy names what citizens feel when freedom is functioning. Think about language itself. Officially, this country is the United States of America, yet we simply say America, even though millions across continents live in the Americas. Why? Because language often carries symbolic meaning beyond technical precision. That is why my book, the book I wrote, called I Stand with the Soul of America, not I Stand with the Soul of the United States of America, because America carries the idea, dream, failure, promise, contradiction, soul. Now, some days lately, the only soul she seems to have left is reruns of Soul Train. And still, we understand what is meant. That is language doing what language has always done, holding complexity. Perhaps this is the thing that gets me most. So many people are no longer arguing to understand. They're arguing to preserve internal comfort, to protect identity, to defend what calms their nervous system, to change meaning midstream. But democracy, and the republic too, require tolerance for nuance. If every word becomes tribal territory, we lose the larger meaning. And sometimes people become so determined to correct one phrase that they throw out the baby with the bathwater. Mind my Christopher Durang reference there. What matters most is not whether we win every argument. It is whether we understand what motivates the argument. Because sometimes beneath the correction is something larger, a narrowing of civic imagination, a leaning into new interpretation, a rewriting of language. And once language becomes narrow enough, power becomes easier to hide. We must keep teaching people how language, power, and citizenship live together. This is the defense of democracy. Thank you for listening, and thank you for thinking with me. And as always, I hope we continue asking more questions before accepting easy language, because citizenship requires more than reaction. It requires thought. And this is Defense of Democracy, and I'm Addison Witt.
Let me introduce you to an organization called Defense of Democracy. We're a New York-based nonprofit with chapters across the United States. Our mission is to empower pro-democracy movements at a local level with the goal of protecting the Constitution and other foundational American documents. We have a coalition of like-minded organizations, including faith leaders, veterans, and students, and we work to promote democracy, stand up for inclusivity, and fight censorship and book bans in our libraries and education system. Well, for just $5 a month, about the price of one coffee-type beverage, you can support Defense of Democracy's mission, and you can make a difference in your local community and really in the entire nation. That's just $5 a month. I'm going to say that again. Not a day, not a week, $5 a month. One day out of 30, you can brew your coffee at home and stand up for the America that you know and love. So scan this QR code or visit defenseofdemocracy.org today. Put on a pot of coffee. We got work to do.